Welcome, welcome. Seeing some folks who love the bus, who love walking. Welcome, everyone. Super excited to be co-hosting this event today, Rebuilding Transportation, Connecting People and Places, with some of our amazing partners, local organizers fighting for transit justice and disability justice, to folks at the national level trying to connect all the people and places that we love in a way that is good for people and good for the climate. Really excited to hear from Saul Levin on our team, a little bit of context and introduction to this project. Then we're going to hear from Mercedes some stories from the grassroots of people's experiences with transit. And then we're going to hear from my colleague Giancarlo about building a shared policy agenda for transportation. And then super excited about our guest speakers and co-hosts, Catherine Garcia from Sierra Club and Bakari Height from Labor Network for Sustainability. For now, I'm going to pass it over to Saul to give us some context.
Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you, Priya. So excited to be here. I'm super jazzed to be in community with you all for this conversation. I'm Saul. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the political director here at the Green New Deal Network. And yeah, we're so excited to be here with y'all. There's about over 40 folks on the call already, so we have some good representation. I've seen more than 10 states represented in the chat, from Appalachia to the East Coast, to the West Coast, and everywhere in between. We wanted to talk about the immensely exciting opportunity we have to transform our transportation system to work for people and to give folks freedom around how you get around, how we all get around. We've been in doing research and in community with a lot of folks on this call and others who couldn't make it today for many months, trying to figure out how we can really put together an ambitious plan of how we could change everything so that it's actually works for everybody. I think where I grew up in Michigan, until you're 16, there's basically no way to get around in my community. And so I think young people, elderly folks, my neighbors whose dog my sister would walk because she couldn't even walk or drive, would feel really trapped at home. And so I think that's the experience of a huge number of people. We've gotten together a huge number of friends and growing to put together sort of an initial outline of an agenda of how we could transform our system to really save lives from a safety perspective, to give people freedom and choices, to take on the climate crisis, to deal with racial justice issues in transportation, as well as labor issues. And so we had multiple unions and leaders of all of those issues weigh in in recent weeks to kind of give us a starting point to say, hey, we need something different. We need more choices. We need more frequent buses. We need faster trains. And how can we come together across labor, climate, racial justice, indigenous sovereignty, disability to really put together some really meaningful ideas and campaigns going forward? And take this call as an invitation to collaborate with our team, broadly speaking. We have numerous state and local organizational members who are on this call who are working with us to stand up this campaign. We have numerous organizations who have weighed in already on what this agenda can look like. We have numerous folks from around the country who have shared their stories from Week Without Driving, of how it's impossible to get around their community without driving. And so just immense gratitude to everyone who's weighed in already. And we're hoping this can be a beginning. So we're learning from a lot of folks who have been leading on this, whether it be railroad workers, whether it be folks in the disability community, whether it be folks whose communities have been displaced by highway development that they never asked for. And we're trying to, work with all of you to build as big of a tent and team as possible so that when the government in the coming years has to spend money on transportation, we can get it to be spent on workers. We can get it to be spent on communities impacted by climate change. We can push for it to be spent on zero emission transportation lines and things like that that will really make our lives better and make the lives better of people we don't know. I'm going to kick it over to Mercedes, who's going to share some of the stories that have been collected during this amazing week led by America Walks and other allies.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mercedes. I'm the organizing manager here at Green New Deal Network. While Week Without Driving is going on right now, there are a lot of people we invited to join the challenge, but also on the other hand, there are people who have a lot of barriers and challenges that are preventing them from being able to participate in a challenge like this. And these were kind of some of like the pieces of feedback that we had gotten from them. There's a lot of different reasons why people are not able to participate. One person had mentioned that they have no public transit in their area. They want to have reliable and attractive public transit because it would solve so many of their problems at once, like degradation of habitat, sprawl, climate change, social isolation, not having enough time, inequality, and honestly, the list just keeps going from there. And they make a really great point of why don't we insist on public transit as a whole and who is brainwashing us? We also get feedback from transit being inadequate, cycling feeling dangerous, intersections also just being dangerous for foot traffic or cyclers. And some of those experiences come from, firsthand. Some people have been car free on and off their entire life, like this person here. And they point out too, society doesn't really seem interested in serving their individual needs if they're not using a car. Or other barriers are buses running too infrequently. Sidewalks aren't there in residential areas. Right, actually outside my house right now, the sidewalk ends about halfway up the road and it's along a highway. So nowhere to go from there unless you start walking along the shoulder. Also though, if they can't rely on their vehicle, if their car breaks down, they have to miss work because it takes about 2 hours to get from point A to point B when you start utilizing your public transit, even in the San Francisco Bay Area where this person lives. And they have a lot of good transit options as you compare it to other cities and areas. So they also make note, it's not about having a lot of options, it's about the connectivity of those options and making sure that areas with less infrequent transit get better options and increase the rate of how frequent those are. We've got our seniors, other people who live in rural areas that don't even have option for public transit, also point out that driving after dark or driving in inclement weather is not ideal and also prevents them from being able to do the things they need to do. Other folks wouldn't have to deal with bad traffic. If the transportation system was better, you'd save so much more time. Or if something were to happen to their car again, you could still get to work. And we can increase public transit and limit how many freeways we're building and expanding. So these were just a handful of quite a few really great stories that we got from supporters.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. And these are just some of the many, many stories that we've heard throughout the week. So I think now we're going to head over to Giancarlo to walk through some of the policy agenda that folks pulled together.
Thanks for that, Saul. And thank you, Mercedes, for sharing all of those stories from Week Without Driving. And I encourage people to follow the local organizations that have been organizing Week Without Driving events around the country this week to hear even more of those stories. And before I get into the specific buckets of our agenda, I just want to preface that a lot of the time when transportation gets talked about, the focus is on the big shiny objects. It's on the ribbon cuttings, but not for everything else that goes into making it possible for all of us to get around and meet our needs and have fulfilling, rich lives. So I just wanted to preface that this is not a ribbon cutting transportation agenda. It's for the people and goods that are trying to get to their destination. It's for the workers that are making all of that movement possible, as well as the communities that our transportation infrastructure passes through. We're talking about grand projects like high-speed rail, but also the nuts and bolts of the transportation network, without which high-speed rail and other big projects wouldn't work. Things like sidewalks, bus stops, and even public bathrooms. And now I'll go into this agenda. And the first bullet that we have is a safety first approach to transportation. So we're talking about redesigning our existing streets and roads to prioritize safety, prioritizing safety in new streets and roads that are being built, and making sure that we have connected, complete networks of protected infrastructure for people who are walking, biking, and rolling. When we say freedom to move, we're talking about options for everyone to get around however they choose, including local transit, intercity bus and rail, as well as paratransit options for people who are unable to use public transit as it currently exists. Transit-oriented development. We want to make sure that we are building near existing transit and ensuring that space in these buildings is set aside for not only small businesses that make our community so vibrant, but also public community services that people need to access and are often really inaccessible by transit today. Currently, we also have really inaccessible transit in many places. So one of our bullets is accessibility for all. We want the entire transportation system, the entire transportation network to be ADA compliant. We're talking about elevators. We're talking about level boarding for trains, for metros and subways, for buses. We're talking about abundant paratransit. And crucially, we are talking about restrooms. No longer will we have people running through cities, running through public spaces, trying to find a private business that will allow them to use a restroom. In addition, we're talking about clean air. We're talking about making sure that all vehicles that we have in our transportation system move to be electric or zero emissions, and that we prioritize pollution reductions in environmental justice communities that are next to pieces of infrastructure like rail yards and heavy duty vehicle depots. We are also going to address the people who make the transportation system work, the workers, and creating jobs for even more people to join this industry. We want to bolster workers' rights, as well as their right to bargain and fight for these rights collectively, and the ability of people to join these workforces. Because construction, maintenance, and operation conditions for workers are transportation travel conditions for the rest of us, and we need to make that clear. We're also talking about making sure that our transportation system has justice for all. So we're talking about mapping and repairing communities that have been harmed by highway and rail infrastructure construction throughout the past several decades, especially, and ensuring that we achieve safety for community members on our streets and roads through street redesigns and transit investments primarily. In addition, we also are looking to address and expand affordability. We want roads to be fixed before we build new ones so that people aren't going over potholes and being forced to pay hundreds of dollars to repair their car when all it would have taken to prevent that is a politician making a better decision about a budget. We want subsidies for new vehicles that are coming into the fold right now, like e-bikes that allow people to achieve a lot of the mobility that a car currently offers at a fraction of the price, with a really reduced environmental impact as well. And we also want to make sure that we have reduced fares or even free fares on transit, especially for younger people, for older people, and for people who are economically disadvantaged. We want to make sure that the transit that we build is accessible to everybody, no matter their economic means. And last but not least, especially in light of everything that has happened over the last week or so with Hurricane Helene moving through the southeastern United States and Appalachia, we want climate-ready transit and transportation. We're talking about bus stops that have seating and shelters that protects you from the weather, whether you're in northern Minnesota or southern Florida. We're talking about having not service reduced during weather emergencies like extreme heat events, but higher levels of service during those extreme heat events so that people aren't waiting as long in adverse weather conditions. And last but not least, we need the infrastructure and the human infrastructure to have sufficient disaster response transportation options so that people who are trying to evacuate from a hurricane like Helene aren't forced to either drive several hours on their own in huge traffic jams like has happened so often over the last several years, or they're not forced to get a last minute expensive flight from an airport not near them. So that's the vision that we have so far. And like Saul said, we are still building upon this, especially as we go into the new year and as we come upon future points in time when The federal government's going to be deciding how it wants to fund transportation. But we're really excited to be in this fight with y'all. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Priya.
Thank you so much, Giancarlo, for laying out that beautiful vision. So we're getting to the fun, interactive part of the call, which I'm really excited about. We also have our amazing guest speakers joining us, Catherine Garcia from Sierra Club, Bakari Height from Labor Network for Sustainability. Before I turn it over to them to introduce themselves, I am just going to preview our kind of collaborative activity that we're going to do. So Mercedes, if you could go to the next slide for a second, that'd be great. Awesome. So we're going to have a conversation with our two guest speakers, and as it's happening, we're essentially going to have folks jump into an editable Google slide deck. So if you have that capability on your computer or on your phone, we're going to drop a link to that slide deck in the chat in a moment. And these are basically the questions that our wonderful guests are going to respond to. You know, if this agenda for transportation is passed, what would change about how you get around your neighborhood? And then our second question is, what would change about how you get around your region and the country? So just previewing that, we're going to hear first some introductions from our guest speakers and a little context, and then, but folks are welcome to start adding in their initial thoughts so we can get a sense from everyone who's with us today of how you see the future. Great. So great. I'll kick it off first to Catherine, if you want to just share you know, your name, pronouns, organization, and a little bit about how you work on building a better transit system.
Thank you, Priya. Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Garcia. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Washington, D.C., occupied territory of the Piscataway people, and I work at the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is the oldest grassroots organization in the US, and our mission is to make sure everyone is breathing clean air, drinking clean water, and thriving in their communities. And for us, it really is about trying to make sure that everyone can get from point A to point B in the cleanest way possible, in the most convenient and accessible way possible, and equitably. And so I've worked at the Sierra Club for about 7 years now, and I'm just so inspired of the work we're doing, both at the state, local, and federal level. We've had a lot of wins in the last several years, but this is a key moment to come together and really reimagine how we can transform the transportation system in a way that's more equitable and more convenient, and will help us get the climate pollution reductions that we need at the pace required to address the climate crisis.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And I'll pass it over to Bakari.
Thank you. Hello, all. My name is Bakari Height, he, him. I'm the transit equity organizer with Labor Network for Sustainability. I'm currently based in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm also the co-founder of the MARTA Army down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I've spent the past 10 plus years advocating for better public transportation because I've seen it as such a huge amenity to a lot of cities. If you're living in the city with a subway, you're more than blessed to be able to get around with other places. But I grew up in a small town where all we had was an Amtrak station with a train that ran once a day in each direction. So I understand the importance of needing to connect us, and I'm also working to bring in groups that probably haven't been the most vocal with it, most notably labor, that runs a lot of the transit that you see nowadays, as well as a lot of the transit advocates that don't get to really voice or hear the opinion be heard so much. So I'm glad that you all are on the call, and I'm glad to be a part of this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bakari. Great. And Mercedes, while we have our speakers on, maybe we can take our slides down temporarily. Already seeing some folks jumping into the group brainstorm, which is really awesome. But yeah, I would love to hear, Catherine, based on this kind of draft agenda that we kind of collectively worked on, what would change about how you get around your neighborhood, or how you imagine folks in your community getting around their neighborhood?
Thanks. Yeah. So I, just like Bakari said, you know, DC does have a metro. And so I feel really blessed that we're actually able, my family and I are able to get around town and get around the neighboring area without a car. And I've actually lived the majority of the last 15 years without a car in Washington, D.C., also in New York and in California. And so this is part of why I'm so inspired by the working on the Unity Agenda for Transportation, because by moving these policies and these initiatives and making sure that this is the agenda that we are collectively working on, we can help ensure that more people around the country are able to get around, thinking about getting around, not just in a car. And actually, our mission at the Sierra Club is to make sure that people are able to get around via transit or by bike or by train, and thinking about that first and making sure that infrastructure is in place and it's safe and accessible. I actually have a 4-year-old son, and when he thinks about getting around, he's like already planning which buses to take and which route to take and what stop he's going to get off at. He knows the DC Metro system by heart and can list all of the trains. And so this work, I mean, I really take this as an inspiring moment. This is why I get up every morning, to make sure that everyone is able to get around in a way that's actually decarbonizing the transportation system. Right now, we're really living in like a status quo, which is designed to be really car centered, and we need to break that system.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love the image of a 4-year-old already knowing the transit system by heart. That's so special, especially as we're coming off of, the week without driving, just imagining like a life without driving and relying mostly on public transit. That's so special and wonderful. Awesome. Bakari, I would love to hear what you think. If this agenda passed, what would change about how you get around your neighborhood?
Definitely the reliability. I know a lot of what the federal government is looking at is operations, which is really key. And what a lot of people don't realize is that not only do you need to put into the capital improvements to build a lot of this, you also need funding to make sure it runs, and also to pay the people that operate it. So, but this would definitely change with reliability, because, being here in Baltimore, it's like playing Russian roulette with a lot of these buses. They'll show up sometimes they'll show up late, sometimes they won't show up at all. But even like more heartbreaking is the fact that a lot of the kids in the Baltimore City public school system have to take the MDOT MTA. So they also fail because it doesn't show up on time, or they have to take 2 to 3 buses and a train to get to their school of choice. So it really does help, with a lot more populations than a lot of people think. And I'm glad Week Without Driving was brought up, because the stark amount of people that are without a vehicle is large, and we built this country up to where it's almost become like a status symbol that you have to have a vehicle, and you're almost looked at as a mark if you don't have one. And I've lived in so many cities without a vehicle. I've lived in Atlanta without a vehicle. I've lived in Dallas, Texas without a vehicle. I've lived in the Bay Area without a vehicle. Now I live in Baltimore without a vehicle. It's not necessarily a point of being less than, or being someone that just isn't deserving of it. I just don't want to contribute to these carbon emissions that J.D. Vance was talking about, but never really got to a solution to. So I really do want this to be not necessarily a haves and have not conversation, but more of a let's look at another way to live. I'm a huge proponent for transit-oriented development. I bought my first condo right by a MARTA station. So I can easily get to the airport within 30 minutes. I can easily get around and walk around a community and literally have that 15-minute community that I've always wanted to live in. And I want that vision for others, but I want others to see it, and I want others to share into this and also envision what that would look like. Too many people are making too many excuses. So yeah, I think that this would really be beneficial, and especially if we did get political leaders to also share into this vision, that we could gain this clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like the kind of structural nature of how reliant folks are meant to be on car-based transit yeah, sometimes feels out of our control, but if we get together and get really strategic and push the right leaders to spend money in the way that we need for public transit and for more options, and also pushing for, like you said, transit-oriented development and really reshaping our neighborhoods, I feel like that is what's really needed. And we know the urgency is here, and that we are running out of time to make an impact on the climate crisis, and transportation is one of the biggest sectors of emissions. So yeah, I feel like imagining from the neighborhood level, we'll build and build and eventually have the kind of broader impacts that we need to reduce emissions. Great. Before we go to our next question, I just want to shout out some of the great responses that we're seeing in our Jamboard. I'm seeing some really beautiful things in here. So if this agenda passed, what would change about how you get around your neighborhood? The sidewalks on my street would be wider and have space for more than one pedestrian at a time. I love that. More people in shared public space, stronger feelings of safety and community connections. Having a protected bike lane network and reliable public transit that addresses maintenance issues effectively. More street festivals and outdoor dining in my neighborhood to enjoy public space. I wouldn't have to budget 2 to 3 times the amount of time to choose the bus. I'd be able to sit at the bus stop instead of having to stand and wait in a nearby building shade. Some of these are such like simple and also really beautiful. I love the idea. I'm seeing a lot about like public space and reclaiming public space and also reclaiming time. And I think that's definitely fundamental to the shared vision we're building, is how we can have more freedom, more flexibility, more control, and not be so at the whim of the infrastructure that we inherited. So thanks so much for jumping in, everybody. Cool. So we can go ahead to our next question. I'll just, for folks who are in our shared slide deck, you can just go to the second slide with all the green sticky notes on it. And the second question also for our guests is, if this agenda passed, what would change about how we get around our whole regions, like the regions we live in, or even the whole country?
I can kick it off. So I really am focused on reducing emissions in the transportation sector. This is really close to home. I have a lot of friends and colleagues that were in North Carolina, and previously to that, living in California, I was personally affected by the smoke from wildfires. And then prior to that, I was living in New York during Hurricane Sandy. And so we absolutely need to do everything we can to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, which is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. We know that the status quo is about driving, and it's very car-centric in many communities and many areas of the country. And so things we're working on is really needing to shift away from expanding highways and expanding freeways, living with this reality of having limited and infrequent public transportation. I saw in the chat, no more our buses. When I was living in Davis, California, sometimes the bus would come like every hour, if it was late, every hour and a half, and that's just unacceptable. And then this idea of driving personal vehicles. So we're working a lot on trying to have shared vehicles, definitely coming to the issue first with making it easy as possible to get around without a car. But if somebody does need to drive, making sure that folks have access to electric vehicles that are powered by clean, renewable energy. And that's something that we're really working hard on at the Sierra Club. Early in the call, Mercedes mentioned some barriers folks are facing, particularly around Week Without Driving. This is something we have heard. We're a national partner of Week Without Driving, and we're really trying to work on the solutions in real time, in a near-term way. So thinking about alternatives to flying with high-speed rail across the country. We have a big initiative to work with other groups on policies and funding for high-speed rail and other investments in Amtrak and in rail across the country. And then obviously with alternatives to driving, making sure we are building out a safe network for bikes, promoting the e-bike incentives that are in place and expanding those, and then making sure we have reliable bus and trains throughout our communities.
Amazing. Yes, we love to hear high-speed trains over here at GNDN. So yeah, definitely agree. And yeah, I appreciate how you brought it back to kind of like, yeah, interconnection regionally and nationally does rely on local transportation being really robust too. It's one thing to, even as we're still reliant on airplanes, but even just getting to and from an airport, getting to and from a train station, all of these different scales are really important to address, and thinking about it as an interconnected kind of, multimodal approach is something that we're really excited to scheme about. Bakari, how about you? If this agenda passed, what would change about how you get around your region or the whole country?
Oh, I think this would really be beneficial for me. I'm having such a good time taking Amtrak back and forth between different cities from Baltimore because Baltimore has a really lovely Penn station that they're doing many improvements on. But I would love to see Atlanta in the same situation. I think they're both opposites to where Atlanta has pretty decent intra-city public transportation, but horrible intercity transportation. And like I would also stop flying a lot, like honestly. Now that Southwest wants to assign seats to us, this gives me a better incentive to take Amtrak. And that's something I've always wanted to study is just kind of how we upgrade the system of taking a train everywhere because it's no reason why we were the pioneers back in the 1800s and 1900s of train travel. And now we've taken such a huge backseat to other countries just because we've wanted to force everybody into a vehicle. And you can see a lot of these stations and a lot of the improvements for this. And I would also love to start taking buses more. My heart goes out to everybody in Chicago that is probably at risk for losing probably one of the largest cities with an inner city bus terminal. That's a huge cutoff for a lot of people that live in a lot of small towns like I grew up in. We had a Greyhound service, but then it was they're taken away from us. So the only way that we could get from to Miami or to New York was Amtrak. And I didn't start taking that until I was an adult. So it would really be huge for me because I'm a huge proponent of Amtrak. But I would love to see this being taken more seriously to get to places quicker. I would love to take Amtrak to Chicago, but I'm not willing to spend 20 hours on a train to do that with going through all these different cities at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. So I would love to see this and also see more dignity that's had with services like Greyhound, from the comparison of an airport which looks shiny to a Greyhound bus terminal that looks dingy and the doors locked because somebody locked themselves in and the only toilet in the place. So I think this would really be a huge way of traveling, but definitely a huge boost to me traveling as I've already done this.
Absolutely. I love that you use the word dignity. I feel like that sums up so much of just, traveling and commuting and moving around is just part of how communities work and how people work. And yeah, to be able to do so with a lot more flexibility and a lot more reliability and being able to traverse bigger distances with a lower carbon footprint and a lower time footprint. I hear you on those kind of, multi-state Amtrak rides. It can be both beautiful, but who has the time and who is able to kind of spend that time or who has to spend that time because they don't have access to other forms of transportation. So yeah, if we can get people to move more quickly where they need to go, that will really shape everything. I do want to call out some of the things that came up in our group brainstorm. So if this agenda passed, what would change about how people get around their regions or even the whole country? I'd be able to go home to the Midwest and train with my dog, and it would be so fast. That's wonderful. Easier to travel between places. And also once you're there, you don't need to rent a car. Flying would be much less necessary. Absolutely. Good food and drinks on Amtrak. Yes. Definitely need more of that. Giving my parents freedom to age in the house they currently live in without the danger of driving, absolutely. I think from a kind of access standpoint, better forms of transit that are safer for people of all ages, people of all abilities, disabilities, et cetera, is so important. Great. So this is really great. Folks, feel free to add more ideas to this group brainstorm. It's really awesome to hear from everyone participating. I'd love to just as a close out, both Catherine and Bakari, thanks so much for being here with us.
Sure. Thank you for everyone who's here. I am so excited to work with all of you to make this vision a reality. There's a lot at stake, but there's so much we can do. And thank you to Sal and the Green New Deal Network for pulling this call together so quickly. And let's get rolling.
Please bring people into this so that we can continue to have this conversation and bring folks into this fold. We can't continue to safeguard this. We've got to share it with others. Thanks.
I'm going to pass it to Mercedes to close us out with a final next step.
Thanks, Saul. We're about done, everybody. Just a couple of last minute things to call out. Save the date. We have a post-election strategy call coming up on Thursday, November 7th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Link is already in the chat. And follow us on Instagram and X. Our @ is right there on the slide. I'm going to play some music, so please take your time leaving. And grab those links, grab the @ and then hopefully we'll get to see you guys in a little over a month.
Thanks, everyone.